Доброго дня, шановні спікери, шановні.
Good morning, dear audience and those who watch us online. So I'm happy to announce the commencement of the first briefing, which is called Autonomy and Transparency of Financial Processes in the Educational Institutions. And I'm giving the floor to Ms. Svitlana Pavlysh, which is coordinator of the USAID project. Dear colleagues, thank you for this event, and we have decided to mark this day, the day of the 9th of December, which is the day of Anti-Corruption Day and the Day of the Educational Institutions, and we decided to also to have such an event, and I'm happy to present my interlocutors today who will discuss the issues which we have in this area. In Ukraine, the anti-corruption work and transparency, integrity is quite widely discussed, especially in educational system. But this is mostly done about the academic integrity, but not so much is devoted to such thing as administrative management of schools and other educational institutions, while more synergy is needed to curb corruption in this sphere. And by the way, more money allocated for education does not automatically mean the better education, because the majority of allocated money still could be spent on the maintenance costs or increased salaries of teachers and professors, while the quality of education and satisfaction of the students' needs would not improve. And in order to overcome this problem, the autonomy of schools is one of the ways, and this would allow to manage better the funds which are allocated to schools. I'm happy to present my interlocutors, our today's speaker, Ms. Viktoria Kozachenko, who is head of the Integrity Office of National Anti-Corruption Agency, and Mr. Serhiy Gorbachov, first educational ombudsman in Ukraine, and Ms. Kovalova, Ms. Khylko from the school number 249 in Kyiv, secondary school. So what can we do to improve the situation with the funding and the better allocation of funding? Victoria, in your office, you have such a project which is called the Transparent School. Whether you cover this very issue, financial autonomy of schools, and would you please generally characterize your work in the area of education? Thank you, Svitlana. I believe that I should start with the description what is the main area of NACP State Corruption Prevention Agency, which is the central governmental body which is responsible for the formulation of the anti-corruption policy and is responsible for formation of zero tolerance to corruption. After reboots of the corruption prevention agency, we started to work on the strategy of integral behavior. Yeah, and quite recently we had published our approach, how this should be done, because the majority of population look at the anti-corruption reform in the light of declarations, whistleblowers institute, etc. But their own traditions and customs are not in the focus of general public. That is the petty corruption, corruption which exists in everyday life, remains beyond the focus of public attention. And without properly tackling this everyday corruption, we would not transform our culture or traditions and habits. And we have to offer convenient alternatives to the old practices which open opportunities for corruption. We have 5 fundamentals of anti-corruption policy, like digitalization, offering convenient legal and lawful alternatives, decreasing duplication of governmental functions, etc. And here the state should play its role. But the second is formation of integral habits, integral ways of behavior, and people in general have to form demand for the integral behavior. And unless common people would not change their attitude towards the corruption and would not change their everyday habits, we would not succeed in our overall anti-corruption work. Those strategies should be promoted via alternative discourse and explain that today's corruption does not bring advantages. This is unsuccessful behavior, and integrity should be introduced into the school and university environment. And young people should move from one grade to another at school and should be behaved and brought up in the atmosphere of anti-corruption propaganda, but not direct, but indirect awareness raising. And moreover, we should not allow a situation when students at the lessons, they hear that the things should be done like this. When they go out from the classroom, they face quite different reality. And that's why we should increase transparency and integrity in the school environment. And that is, we have to see educational institutions in the light of integrity and to think about the rights and obligations and explain the right processes. You may have a good procedure, but without procedure, but without explanation, how do you get proper information, then the strategy would fail. And here we come to the transformation of the school itself. Unless the school is perceived as a subject, not like an object of influence, we would not succeed. We have to bring together the what we say and what we do. In this case, students and young people will take seriously all our anti-corruption work. So our approach is as follows. We have to understand what's going in schools while the school understands that it has its own role to play for which it is responsible. Thank you. Thank you very much. And as far as I know, you have a picture with the QR codes. And going to these QR codes, you will be able to get to the websites. And you will easily find the necessary information on Facebook and on the Integrity Office. While we will discuss now, what does financial autonomy mean? What is it actually? Whether it is typically Ukrainian know-how, or we have seen this as an experience of other countries, etc. Thank you. First of all, it's not purely Ukrainian know-how. This is actually the global trend now. Financial autonomy means that an organization is able to make decisions about financial management for the needs of this very institution based on its tasks and objectives. One of the functions of the educational ombudsman is to ensure enjoyment of rights, but without sufficient finance, the enjoyment of rights is not possible. Of course, financial means are never sufficient. But even with the available means, you should be able to allocate them wisely. And in order to make this wisely, you should do this publicly. And here we find big problems when the funding is wrongly spent this means that this is done for the sake of bribes, kickbacks, misuse of money, etc. And in this case, this is the criminal matter and subject to the corruption prevention agency scope. But in Article 30 in the law of education, which is about the funding of schools, and it provides the list of components which should be covered on the website of a school. And that information is quite difficult to comply with. For 4 years, I had been working as a school principal, and I am a professional software programmer, and I was unable to find the information to put on my website. I was unable to see all the transactions related to my school. Alyona represents the school, which is financially autonomous, and she can go to her bank information and get all the coverage of all the transactions. Even in Kyiv, there is only 10% of such schools, not to mention the rest of Ukraine. And in order to implement this all around Ukraine, you have to train teachers. Any Ukrainian citizen should be able to go to a website and to some platform or resource and find how much money were allocated for education, how much money was allocated to specific schools, how those money was spent, etc. Sorry for coming straightly to the point, but Viktoria is absolutely right that you cannot just declare that you are zero tolerant to corruption. You should offer at least some tools, but those tools, they are not available, or better to say they are available, but they could be found here and there, but you do not know where to look for them. A year ago, in the Educational Ombudsman Service, we have produced the following document. Now we will show you the cover and the QR code of this report, which Mr. Gorbachov mentioned. In this review, we presented the rights in education which you may enjoy, and how you should demand the enjoyment of that rights. And I hope that we will continue our joint work with the Integrity Office from Corruption Prevention Agency. We have started our work on the second review of this type. We are open to cooperation. As of now, I think that's enough because there is much work to do in this area. Serhiy, you mentioned that there are not so many schools which are willing to become financially autonomous. What might be the reason for this? As far as I know, you had done some monitoring, you studied the problem. Perhaps you produced some opinion. I believe that this is quite comprehensive problem, and one of the negative factors is that the managers of educational administrations are not eager to transfer this responsibility and this function because there is an access to financial flows, for example, kickbacks from school repairs. There are such things as educational subventions from which the teachers' salaries are paid. This is 75-85% of such salaries, but those subventions are avoided or paid, allocated to the schools in manual way, so to say, according to very complicated formula. And this allowed a lot of discretion for the local administration who are managers of these funds. The second factor is that negative factor is that many schools prefer not to be responsible for these funds. They are aware that financial responsibility requires clear understanding of all the legal procedures about public procurement, etc. And this may result in criminal persecution, breaching of that legislation. And some principals are not happy with that, and they do not wish to take this responsibility on them. Each school is a rather comprehensive system, and with a lot of people, there is a crossroad of multiple interests, and all those social groups have their own interests and their own vision how funding should be allocated and spent. That is, transfer to financial autonomy is a big problem. We do not have any algorithms, and the people do not have sufficient knowledge. And there is also a neighboring problem. The topic of money which are requested from parents for the needs of the school had become quite famous, and almost never this money are requested by the school administration. School principals invite some, so to say, activists and decide that they should collect some money from other parents and these active parents or volunteer parents start to collect money, among others, for so-called needs of the school. But the money for this need are actually allocated from the budget. Actually, the majority of such needs may be satisfied via official request from the school principal to the budget manager in the regional administration. And in my years of school principal, quite often I suggested to parents, let us apply a request for funding, and some parents objected because for them it was easier to collect 100 money, 100 hryvnia, instead of very close involvement into the school, everyday school business. When we are announcing the public procurement bidding, and for example, we launched bid for the sound equipment for the school, and original amount of 92,000 hryvnia was cut to something more than 70. There are some schools that had transferred to this financial autonomy, and Ms. Khylko is actually principal in such a school. When you became the principal of that school, were you aware that this is very special area, and whether you required some additional knowledge, education, etc.? Good afternoon. When I became the principal of 249 school, secondary school in Desnianskyi district, I had no idea that that school, 6 years ago, I had no idea that that school was financially independent, but I understood that I had to preserve the previous traditions. The Desnianskyi district in Kyiv is rather specific, and this specificity means that all the schools in that district are financially autonomous. From the first day, for me, it was not that easy to understand all the details about financial accounting, about marketing, about other features such as architecture, such as supplies expert, etc. But as of today, I cannot imagine my function of the school principal without that, because I'm responsible for the high level of uniqueness of my school. And without this financial autonomy, the unique nature of my school would not exist. And I can easily understand those school principals who are not so eager to take these additional responsibilities on them, because I agree, we lack special knowledge, we lack legal advice, we lack commercial advice from experts. Of course, I've got my pedagogical education, but I was not prepared to all those functions which I have to carry out. And of course, from my point of view, I clearly see the advantages. Each summer, we begin to form the budget estimations which we request from the regional administration for the next year. And all the parents and all the students understand that they shall contribute to this process. All the teachers continuously write notes to me what they need for the educational process, either computer equipment or some visual aids or even some furniture for their classrooms. And based on these requests from the teachers, I sit together with the accountant, with my supplies expert, and we start thinking about our priority needs. And when in January the budget estimates eventually come to our school, we reallocate our needs to the funding which is provided to us. This year we got the amount which was calculated according to the formula. The amount was not cut down, and frankly speaking, it was sufficient for the priority needs, including capital repairs and some minor overhauls. Some years ago, when I just began my work, the funding was not as good as it is now. And I am very happy when students of senior classes, senior grades, they express their satisfaction with the training environment, with the classrooms, equipment, etc. Of course, this financial responsibility is a heavy burden. And financial accounting and public procurement are not easy things. These are some opportunities for us to to attend special training about public procurement. And I also can plan money allocations. Of course, for me, this means that I have to schedule my time differently, but this opens also some opportunities. Thank you, Alyona. I was happy to hear that in your school you have this pedagogic of partnership, and this allows to create an integral environment. We have a QR code which brings us to the school, to the website of your school, and before this press conference we checked whether you provide financial reports, etc. And we found that it was easy to find your financial reports and all sorts of information. On the one hand, we may say that the information is on some website, but you cannot find it. But on the other hand, you may go to the website and find it easily. And this is about your side. On this website, you can easily find the information, and you may easily identify among the highlights, and you may study this as a best practice. I have another question to Ms. Khylko. You mentioned that of course you never get sufficient money. And now my question, whether parents come to you and ask how have you spent this or that money? From the very beginning, we posted all the information on the school website, but later I understood that it was excessive information, and we described all the units, how much we procured, how much we spent per each unit, and we always presented those reports publicly and allowed open access to the general meeting of parents in our school. But now the funding is slightly bigger, and on the other hand, we do not wish to duplicate information. Actually, the financial accountant office publish all the primary documentation on Prozora website. That's why on our school website we post only the financial accountants reports, and thus parents can review these reports. This is called financial reports. and we try to make this design as simple as possible. Parents are always interested to know when this or that thing would be done, when you will buy this or that goods. For example, where is antiseptic sprays, whether they are quality antiseptics, at which price you have bought it. Of course, now parents cannot enter this school freely, but actually they can request for the access in advance, and they would be allowed to come and check. The first grade students, pupils, they always come to the newly restored and equipped class, and nobody requests from them to pay additional money for the equipment of this classroom. And parents are very happy. Okay, we have started discussion about the website. The websites usually should be designed by somebody who is submitting information for the website. Either this is you or the school psychologist or whoever, or you have a special copywriter to do this. Unfortunately, we do not have the site administrator, but I've appointed a teacher who is passionate about websites, and she started to do this, and she has designed the school website, and now she administers it and updates all the information. We submit our pieces of information to her, and she posts it on our website. Of course, it would be good to have a person, computer support and maintenance, for computer support and maintenance, because we have a lot of computers in our school, and all the time we need some minor maintenance operations for the school computers. And I'm ready to sign a contract with such such a service provider. I have to interfere because you raised a very important issue. It's about digitalization of a school, and here finance is only part of the problem. In no school, both private or state school, you would not find this position, computer expert. While you have to ensure transparency. Without transparency, there won't be trust. But without without a computer expert who would be able to update information promptly and properly, you would have problems. A week ago, I've written an official letter to the Cabinet of Ministers and suggested to introduce to the school staff this position, the technical specialist who would be responsible for the computer administration. And while now this is additional burden which is put either on teachers of mathematics, school principals, I don't know, physical fitness trainers, or even the senior grade students. And we have to simplify this process, which will create more transparency and more trust to school. Thank you, Serhiy. About presentation of this information, I would like to present such a useful tool, the map of procurements. And this map shows how much money are spent by each school. Actually, this information is mapped. How many requests for services, how many contracts were signed, how much money was spent for what. And at the very beginning, it was not so easy to understand how much was spent and for what. So we started from Kyiv. At the first stage, an article was published about the schools in Kyiv and about overhauls and repairs in schools. After that article, we received a lot of response from the parents, and parents requested to monitor the process somehow. Later on, 7 cities were added, and we described, we mapped the situation in those 7 cities, and we reflected information about schools and kindergartens. Then we applied to the USAID project, anti-corruption cooperation, and we had created a new map, which was created by the Transparency International Ukraine. And as of now, more and more schools keep joining to this mapping, and it's quite easy to work with the mapping of those schools which are financially autonomous. For those which are not financially autonomous, you should collect information from multiple resources. So you have go to different websites, check them, find some information, then bring it together. And when you deal with the procurements for school number 1, you cannot easily identify the number of this school and the city and proper name of the school, and you immediately have doubts whether this is one and the same school or these are quite different schools. So here you see this map. What is bought by your school? This is interactive map. On the left side, you can enter the search entries. You can enter the keyword. This map has the problem with the coordinates. And here you see that the school is built in the midst of a highway. And this is the problem with identification where the school actually is. These are QR codes, and you can find this map. The QR code in the left lower corner. This is a manual which may explain how to work with this map. While in the right column you have the QR codes which might be used by the school principals, how to make procurements, how to make your processes more transparent, how to reach the results what you set to yourself. And when I mentioned that complicated sources where you can extract some information, Serhiy, whether you have any tools which can help whether all these schools can now transfer to financial autonomy. The issue with the dispersed data origins from the fact that we do not have the uniform state policy as to the financial autonomy. Quite often I travel much and visiting many schools, regions. I communicate with teachers, with the principals, with parents, and now I can easily predict all the questions. When I come to any district and ask a question, what about educational statistics? If I do not understand how many teachers I have, how many support personnel I have, etc. And when I am shown the good database, I immediately ask how this coordinates with the centralized base. They mentioned that it is not connected to the central base. And first I was very much surprised. Then I understood that this is quite broadly spread. We have all sorts of reports which are submitted by schools to the central level in electronic form, but on the memory sticks. They are not connected to the centralized internet systems, because in order to work with these big databases, each school principal has to have, or each school employee who is dealing with that should have the electronic signature. Then you have to train everybody. On the other hand, if we wish to have the well-coordinated digitalized information system in education, if we want to have a unified databases, the highlights of the columns in that database, they should be uniform. Actually, it is quite simple to unify the search for the schools. You should put this organizational code as the main search entry, because this code is unique. We have such a thing as the Institute of Educational Analysis. They are subject to the Ministry of Education. They have very interesting reports, but they publish these reports in a PDF format. They cannot be processed digitally, while they should be uploaded in the digitalized forms. You mentioned this resource about map, and we have the educational map of Kyiv, which is created by the Kyiv Educational Department. And several other databases. But the map is separate. The tables explaining that map are separate things. And we need to know what is in those tables too. And it is not so easy to compare these two sources, because when you bring them together, you understand whether the school is attractive. There are schools where capacity is 800, but you have only 300 students, while there are schools where there is a capacity of 800, but you have 1,200 students. But actually, this depends on the amount of money allocated to each skill. No, it's actually almost the same amount of money per capita or per student capita. We have a dashboard at the Ministry of Education. And in that dashboard, you can find all the information about schools. You look at the district and see that there are 300 meters between two schools. Just imagine a small city in the east, the unified school, which is well equipped, and the cost of education per student is 17,000 per year. And in several hundred meters, there is another school which is maintained by the local council, and there the cost is 48,000 per student per year. Why? Because there are huge premises. While in the centralized school, this is 27 children per class, while in the second school, there are 14 kids per classroom. And these disproportions prevents from proper organization of education. This demonstrates that that local authorities should responsibly take this task. Quite often, the local authorities are not eager to do optimization in such schools because they face huge resistance from people which got accustomed to this situation. But they should explain that students in those centralized schools would get better education because those centralized schools, they are better equipped and they have better teachers. There is a myth that the lesser students you have in a classroom, the better education they would get. That's not true. In villages, we have 7, 8 pupils in a class, but they do not get the best education. PISA surveys and Ukrainian surveys prove there is a huge disproportion between in quality of education between rural schools and urban schools. Local communities, rural communities cannot afford to have equally good equipped schools. They can afford just only one school and organize transportation via school buses and ensure access for students from the surrounding regions. But still now we face a huge resistance, and one of the sources of this resistance are those school principals who would not be subordinated, who do not want to become subordinated to the centralized schools. And in this situation, you need better communication. In our report, we had shown a map which reflects how much requests were received from parents as to the organization of the educational process. As of June, as for the organization of education. The local authorities decide to organize the educational institution like a school. They do not explain why this designed educational institution is better than several old ones. When I organize Zoom meetings, I hear quarrels between teachers, local administration, and parents. The school principal disagrees to be a branch of this bigger school. And then I ask them why this would be better for your children. And I act as a communicator. And in a result of such 2-hour discussion, the parents ask the local administration why you have not discussed that with us earlier. And I hear from them that they actually did not campaign. They gave the articles in the local newspapers. They provided no explanation. They did not invite parents to the new schools. But this information should be presented on the school websites, and we should teach people how to do that. And this explains that there are a lot of problems in this area which are interrelated. That is effectiveness, responsibility, and better use of funds. Actually, all that will result in more safe educational environment for our children. Serhiy, as far as I know, that you make strategic planning in your institution. Do you have any plans for financial autonomy? Financial autonomy of the educational institutions. I mean, this project, which we are doing jointly with the NACP and the schools, I believe this is the main thing. Without quality financial economy, we would never ensure high quality education. We have to provide assistance, and we constantly contact with the cabinet of ministers and with the parliament on these issues. And here the biggest problem is the biggest problem is to convince people to take this responsibility, which similarly could bring to the criminal offenses in case of poor understanding. And on the other way, the lack of energy from the school principals. And I hope that Corruption Prevention Agency and the Cabinet of Ministers and the Verkhovna Rada Committee will unite their efforts and find some solutions. But here I have maybe unpleasant or pleasant news, I don't know. Educational sphere in general is very conservative. It has a lot of inertia. As a societal institution, it carries out two functions. On the one hand, it has to translate the cultural codes that supports the society in its stability. On the other hand, the education has to respond flexibly on the requirements of the situation, current situation. And this conflict of two opposite functions is the main engine for the educational development. And the changes there could not be prompt. Finland and Estonia, they've been implementing their educational reforms for more than 20 years now, while we have only 5 years to the main law about reform of the new Ukrainian school, and less than 2 years when the latest law in this area was passed. We have to make education more student-oriented, student-centered, maybe. I'm sorry that I'm speaking too much, but all our efforts the efforts of Alyona, the efforts of Viktoria, and my efforts as an ombudsman, they should be united with a joint purpose. As far as I know, Mark Twain once mentioned that even if you do not know where you are going, if you do not know when you are going, you would never reach your destination point. You mentioned that transparency means trust, that is integrity, and transparency are the basics of trust. And also we have heard that we have to do some educational work. The psychology of each person can more easily perceive something which is quite familiar. And my question to Viktoria, what could be done, whether you have some projects in mind? Yes, thank you for this question. Thinking about our plans, we should base our plans on the continuity and inheritance. That is, when we work with the students, we should develop integrated materials for the school curricula. And it should not be optional, it should become compulsory. In the 2022 will produce these materials working for students and for teachers. We have launched first training course for students with all our partners, and we have produced core product. You can find it on our website. But our final objective is for education for teachers is to offer curricula about integrity as part of training, and further work with educational institutions for teachers. That is, teachers to be should learn what is integrity, what is transparency. From the students' days. If we think about autonomous schools, when we speak about school administrations, we should keep in mind the school management. We have to work with the golden standard. When we have 10% of financially autonomous schools who can act perfectly, and this practice should be widespread and become a feature of systemic. That is, we have to develop the golden standard, a school which is financially autonomous, which can develop all the tools, electronic diaries, and this should not be optional. It should be transparent, it should be independent. it should use the following tools. The teachers should be subject to the following trainings. There should be student self-governments. It should be able to develop proper communication, which is very important for communication with the surrounding world. And this digitalization could not be sporadic. The school should systemically submit this information and provide it to parents. And everybody is able to understand what should be done. We had put very ambitious goal to develop this golden standard with partners, while our role is to ensure integrity. And thus, young people, young generations will understand what integrity is. As of now, we analyze corruption risks of the educational institutions, and in 2022, we will produce this golden standard and describe this new modern school. I will add, this work has already started. And Alyona, when the audit is planned for your school this year, I would like to point out that we have institutional audit of the educational institutions. And this audit allows to check the educational environment. There is financial responsibility, finance allocations, integrity, etc. It is very important that parents should understand that educational process is well structured and they cannot influence it. I participated in that project. I wrote the manual for school principals, how the school could improve its work. And the analysis of corruption risks, which is now carried out by Corruption Prevention Agency. Then we will form our recommendations to the Educational Quality Agency and improve the procedure of the audit. And this will become part of that training which I mentioned. We have to learn these basics by ourselves. The more we go in depth, the more attractive perspectives we see. That's why, on the one hand, I understand that the process is rather complicated. On the other hand, I am happy that we are moving forward. And once again, educational process is full of inertia. I hope that our today's discussion, which is approaching to its end, it will become even broader than just discussion between four speakers. Do we have any questions from the audience? We are waiting for a minute. It looks like we're approaching to the end of our press conference, and I'm happy to thank to all the participants. I believe that you are satisfied with today's discussion, and that in 15 years we would achieve the objective that we have set. Okay, since there are no questions from our audience, then thank you to all the participants, and goodbye.